Welcome back to the Mentor Roulette grind. Once again, a more varied set, although we do still have a few extremes. That said, for duty 1, we went to Bogman with Bogman as Monkman, the one job that has positionals at this level. For duty 2, we went to do some plant extermination, and this time around, our tank decided that the poison clouds can be ignored. On the plus side, it seems like they don't stack, so if you're fine standing in one, then you can ignore the rest. Pretty convenient. For duty 3, we went to the Vault as Paladin. Due to a severe lack of single target upgrades at this level, Paladin's AoE is so strong that as long as there are at least 2 targets, it is always better to use than single target. When it comes to the Vault itself, there's something about the second boss. He has this mechanic where he places a black hole at the edge of the arena, twice. But then when he does this big AoE hitting all over the place, it removes the holes. I feel like back in the day, that didn't happen, so you could easily end up with 4 or 5 black holes filling up the arena. Do I remember that wrong? I'm not sure. What do you think? Anyway, we cleared the duty with no issues, of course. For duty 4, we went to Bird Up as Monk. We ended up having to do it in 2 waves. I've heard from someone where the fight dragged on for a long time that the legends of a final, bigger mob spawning in eventually are supposedly false. For duty 5, we went to Antitower as Astrologian. Our team was a bit odd, with the tank seeming to only use their 1-3 combo for single target and only Unleash for AoE. They also didn't appear to use their MP attacks, ever. Mitigation also only came up when they were targeted by a tank buster, where they used everything, of course. The Black Mage also had a very odd rotation, pretty randomly choosing how low MP they need before switching to Ice. Randomly using Scathe, seeming to prefer to use Umbral Soul to get their MP over just casting Blizzard 4, which of course meant they only had 1 heart instead of 3. A lot of odd stuff there. I'm not as certain about the ninja, but I did see a moment where they had the Suiton buff and Kasatsu, so it seems like they have the setup for their burst decently covered. With the rather odd players, I think we're fortunate that both on the first and last boss, I was not picked for the mechanic that took control of 2 players until they got help, because I could identify 2 players that might not realize they're supposed to help. And then, at the very end of the final boss fight, our Black Mage had the limit break reflected back at them due to timing the cast with the brace mechanic. Apparently that can happen! For duty 6, we went to Rathalos Extreme as Monk. On the first attempt, we have a lesson in the strictness of the mini-boss phase. The Garuda regularly does frontal cone attacks, and these attacks can hit the person on Rathalos and kill them. So if you are ever the tank for this duty, remember to face Garuda away from everyone else, including Rathalos, as if the player mounting Rathalos dies, the fight is immediately lost. On the second attempt, we reached phase 2 without issue, and Rathalos spent a lot of time spamming stack markers on Ilana and the tank, which, as long as you have the potions and know where to go with it, is probably the safest mechanic in the whole phase, so we quickly cleared without any issues. For duty 7, we went to A1N, Alexander's Oppressor, as Summoner. An interesting fun fact about this duty is that a while back it was the optimal duty to farm Mog Tomes in, since it could be cleared in under 2 minutes and gave 2 tomes. And this could be done even without blue mages, so you could just queue into it. The first trick is to use your knockback immunity in the first room so you don't have to worry about getting shoved around. The second trick to it was to fully single target the Faust, since all the ads despawn anyway. For the boss itself, there isn't really anything beyond bursting so fast that there's nothing to deal with, which is the norm. One weird optimization about Summoner at this level is that Ifrit's attack essentially performs an AoE cone roughly 5 yalms from the target's location towards the user. So to hit both Oppressors, you'd need to target the further away Oppressor. The same applies for Titan, although it being a circle means it's more like an AoE 10 yalms towards you. Very odd, but it makes sense. It makes sense. For duty 8, we went to M12N, Arcadion's Lindwurm, as Samurai. And this run went amazingly well. When it comes to Samurai optimization, the job itself, of course, does not have any properly temporary damage buffs, so when it comes to just playing around your own stuff, as long as cooldowns are being used and Higanbana is being maintained, it doesn't really matter exactly when you do what. But once we account for raid buffs, it can matter. And this party had an Astrologian, a Bard and a Red Mage, so probably bursting on time could matter a lot. For kill speed. The way Samurai does this is by using one Midare Setsugeki in their filler and then setting up one more so that for the burst they can use the Kaishi, a full Midare, Meikyo for Tendo, and the Higanbana, on top of any other cooldown damage they might have. What gets a bit scary about this is if something causes you to drift or delay at all, it can be difficult to get back on track or to even know what you need to do to get back on track in the moment. I tried my best to stick to the optimizing rotation until a mistake threw me off, then I sort of just winged it for the rest. A tip for Lindwurm is that the first time he does a mechanic where you get shoved in a direction, simply use your knockback, as the second time that mechanic comes up, the arena is much cleaner and easier to work with, where the first time it is very easy to slip off the arena if you aim the knockback wrong. What can be really awkward about starting the final phase as Samurai, especially if you finish the first phase with all the stickers, is making the most of it before the damage buffs run out. That being said, this was also the run where I randomly happened to time the LB3 almost exactly perfect to the music. Enjoy! For duty 9, we went to Ruby Weapon as Dragoon. That's a rare sight. I do feel like Ruby Weapon's Helico Claw mechanic is sort of the progenitor of a lot of swirly multi-AoE mechanics. Like, not exactly like that, but we see something similar in Lunar Subterrane and almost exactly the same at the end of Uewata Field Station. Raven's Flight is also a surprisingly evil mechanic for a normal trial. But it does look like a strategy to survive it is to simply move into the first spot Ruby Weapon dashes to once it leaves, as it doesn't appear to return to the same location at any point during it. An interesting little detail about Ruby Weapon is that it also has a DPS check at the very end of it. In fact, it even has a Harden Rage. When it drops to a certain HP threshold, or after it has looped mechanics a certain number of times, it jumps to the center and long casts optimized Ultima, which will wipe the raid. Quite rare in normal content. Phase 2 of the fight thankfully has a checkpoint, but it is really mean for a normal trial fight. Large amounts of raid-wide damage very frequently, 2 adds that have to be separated and tanked, more common for normal content, that then tank busters hard. Somehow it worked out with me tanking one of them as Dragoon, and we also blasted it so fast that if there was any more from it, it would have been dead anyway. These 2 adds are the most likely reason to wipe on this fight, since they are impossible to deal with if they're not separated, and they can so easily kill off anything that isn't a tank. The last thing that tends to kill parties is the mechanic with 4 things that need to be intercepted. Each missed applies a vuln stack, and each caught needs what remains of the raid to kill off the comet that landed. So enough failure leading up to it, and there's no way of surviving. But we managed decently well. For duty 10, we went to Praetorium as Reaper. Not that much interesting to talk about as a Reaper here. But if Reaper was a Pokemon, I'm sort of assuming it would probably be a Ghost and Dark type. Getting a bit creative with the lore, I could imagine it having an ability like Darmanitan's Zen mode, where when you drop below 50% HP, you switch to the Shrouded form, with the implication being either that dropping low causes desperation to lead to the merging, or that the weakened state of the Reaper itself allows the Void Scent more control. Such an ability would likely not be very useful unless the stat boost is so big that it is worth the need to take a hit. Beyond that, I assume it would use pretty standard Ghost and Dark moves, but could make use of both physical and special ones. Maybe Arcane Crest could represent a distinctly unique Protect style move for Reaper that had some sort of support effect, or allowed the Reaper to be hit, but only down to 50% HP to sort of force the opponent to activate its ability. That could be cool. What do you think? Anyway, yeah, the Praetorium went about as you'd expect. For duty 11, we went to Aurum Vale as Gunbreaker. I just want to highlight before anything else that the healer was another solid mentor trying to help. That being said, there's only so much you can do for a Thaumaturge in Aurum Vale. We both tried to get their attention and it didn't work. Which I think is not too surprising, because their rotation is one step removed from straight up just hitting random keys. Let's take the first boss sequence. Transpose from Ice, Fire 3, wait a second, Fire 3, Thunder 2, wait a second, Transpose, Swift Cast, Fire 1, get Fire Starter, Fire 3, wait several seconds, Thunder 2, Sleep, Transpose, Lucid Dreaming, Thunder 1. You get the gist. Thankfully, the rest of the party was good. Otherwise, this might have been a really long run. But let's just say that if the entire party was performing like the Thaumaturge, then this duty would probably not finish. Indeed, at the end of the duty, we both tried to get the attention of the Thaumaturge to give them advice, but they scooted without saying anything. For duty 12, we went back to Rathalos Extreme as Pictomancer, with the same gunbreaker as the previous run. Although they forgot the tank stance initially for phase 1, it actually went quite smoothly. But the moment we entered phase 2, the monk got smacked, survived, then the gunbreaker got smacked, survived, and then we sort of stabilized again. Some advice for Pictomancer is that Rathalos' down gauge moves from GCD attacks, so the main motivation to use all of your other cooldowns is to keep up the pressure there or to prepare a Morgue of the Ages. But once everything is ready to go, it is probably better to stockpile to send it all when Rathalos comes down. And with the monk using Limit Break on the second down, we have no issues taking Rathalos down before much else happens. Just like last time, he also spent an exorbitant amount of time just spamming stack markers, which, as long as the team knows how to handle it, is almost as good as if Rathalos just did nothing. Very nice. For duty 13, we went to Garuda Extreme as White Mage. On the first attempt, it was quite clear that the tanks did not know to separate the adds. Once one of them realized, the other didn't seem to care and seemed to slowly follow along, although it was interrupted by them going down alongside half the raid. Before the end, we sort of tried to separate them a bit just to do something, but the timer on this phase is not that long, so the bell rang and it was over. Before we get a chance to talk anything over, the Paladin just sends Rampart and pulls for the second attempt. Ilana somehow managed to drag Qitana away, but because the tanks decided to tank Garuda and Sopana, roughly in the center, there was no way of moving them far enough apart. Which was made even worse by the fact that once they realized, they came over to bring Qitana in as well. This time we wiped before the enrage. On the third attempt, the Paladin hits Sentinel, shirks the other tank for some reason, and then pulls. When the adds come down, the Paladin actually moves Qitana over to a corner, but because the warrior isn't exactly tanking away, we get a lot of necessary value out of rushing Qitana before the damage reduction sets in. But we essentially brute force the mechanic. We push so hard we even forget about the Satan Plume, but somehow don't get punished for it. And with Qitana down, we quickly mob up Sopana and get on to Garuda. The greatest problem with this last bit of the fight is that you can just rush down Garuda with enough damage and completely ignore everything. If Garuda hops away to come back, enough mitigation from a barrier healer will also be good enough. But failing that, you're supposed to use the Spiny Plume, which needs to be juggled by the tanks and everyone has to be careful to not hurt it and such. Essentially, in a synced state, any party that is incapable of beating Garuda by just rushing her down and maybe mitigating some damage is even less likely to be capable of doing it with the Spiny Plume the intended way. But thankfully we took Garuda down in time. For duty 14, we went to Grand Cosmos as a 10-minute replacement ninja, and the team barely started on the second boss. The key mechanic on this fight is the seedlings during the Gardener's Hymn. The first time you simply have to move the seeds off the grass. The second time, because there's a shove from the side, you instead have to move the seeds such that if they get moved one row down, they don't land on grass. This worked out pretty well. The final boss has this mechanic called Mortal Flame, where you have to pass off the blue flame to furniture, or you die. This also requires that you carefully make sure the furniture doesn't burn from other mechanics, or you will find that there might not be enough furniture for everyone. In our case, despite burning some furniture by accident, we ended up with exactly enough to fix everyone. A funny detail is that the boss will only ever do the mechanic twice, so you don't have to worry about it anymore after the second time. So, as a result, we quickly cleaned up the fight. Finally, for duty 15, we went to Qitana Ravel as Scholar. Near the start of the duty, the Dark Knight did a big pull without saying anything and then died from not pressing Living Dead in time, but also waiting so long with using it that by the time they died, I had already used everything trying to save them. I'd also add that they sat at max MP very frequently throughout the duty, for no reason, and didn't really use TPN much on packs. But it did seem to get used on the tank boss on the first boss, for example. A lot of free mitigation left on the table. After that, they did start to use some mitigation on pulls, but continued to just seem to forget about their MP on pulls sometimes. Although it did feel like they got better as we progressed through the duty, so that's at least something. It probably doesn't come as a surprise that we didn't get to do the trick with the gorillas on the last pull, since it sort of hinges on the tank knowing to pull the pack away to even have an opportunity to do it. But things went alright for the final part of the duty. Another 15 duties in the bag. It is funny how one Rathalos Extreme rarely comes alone, since the person doing it is probably working on it until they get them out, either through a drop or the 50 clears. Anyway, we also hit 28/34 on the achievement. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Twitch or Ko-Fi, links in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, Hound Out of Heaven, the dash mechanic from the final boss in Qitana Ravel, is a direct reference to Cerberus from World of Darkness with the Hound Out of Hell mechanic. It works roughly the same. The only difference is that Cerberus does not have the modern tether indicator for when you are far enough away.